Hello, I'm the Tolkien curmudgeon, back with my third video. Please excuse me for reading it this time. First, a quote from Tolkien's letter number 96, written to his son Christopher in 1945 when Tolkien had not yet finished writing The Lord of the Rings. A story must be told, or there'll be no story. Yet it is the untold stories that are most moving. A little later he continues, endless untold stories, mountains seen far away, never to be climbed, distant trees like niggles, never to be approached, or if so, to become near trees, unless in paradise, or niggles perish. With that in mind, let's reflect upon the fact that Tolkien's Legendarium seems to have one rather large defect. He left a very great deal of his work unfinished. When I first read Unfinished Tales and then the History of Middle-earth series, I felt some disappointment. It seems almost tragic that so many of Tolkien's writings never reached any final form. Of Tuor and his coming to Gondolin and the revised version of the Lay of Luthien, to name just a couple. I read these texts with pleasure, but felt frustrated that I'd never be able to read what Tolkien would have written had he ever finished them. Tolkien's essay on fairy stories and his little tale, Leaf by Niggle, together titled Tree and Leaf, provide a key. Tolkien makes many points in the essay, but let's focus on just a few, mostly told in my own words. Tolkien explains his view that for fantasy, both drama and the visual arts can be less effective than writing a story. As a philologist, he explores the history and meanings of words. The faculty of forming mental images is called the imagination. And in its older sense, the word fantasy was just a synonym. The word spell, now meaning the power-working words of the magician, once meant simply story. This suggests to me that the words of a fantasy narrative become for us something like a magic spell, conjuring up other worlds which are seen only in the mind's eye. In producing fantasy, not only the author, but also the reader have work to do. The reader, by an act of imagination, clothes the writer's words with mental sights and sounds according to each one's experience and predilections. The work of imagination is the essence of fantasy. But in film, drama, or painting, a work of fantasy, in a sense, exits the realm of imagination and enters the actual world of things that we see with our physical eye. As Tolkien says, it imposes one visible form. And in this process, some of the magic of fantasy may be lost. I'd like to offer a memory of mine, which I think helps illustrate the magic of the imagination. I remember a one-panel cartoon from a book in my childhood home. It depicted a woman looking at some architectural ruins, which were nothing more than the broken base from a single ancient column. But in the space above her head floated a very large imagination bubble, with a detailed drawing of a vast Roman city, filled with all manner of ancient temples, triumphal arches, and so on. Inspired by the sight of a few broken fragments of marble, we can gaze in wonder on entire cities reconstructed purely within our own minds. And so we come to the second part of Tree and Leaf, the story of Niggle. Niggle was a painter who could never finish his painting of a great tree. The painting was ever growing and ever changing, and ended up being mostly destroyed without leaving much of itself behind in the world. I've come to realize that we can say, along with Mr. Niggle, when he fell off his bicycle that it is a gift. Not only are the writings of Tolkien a gift, but even it is a gift that they are unfinished. The unfinished narratives of Tolkien are like the unseen country just outside the margins of Niggle's painting, a country which we cannot see, but which we can travel to in our imaginations and accomplish a bit of gardening, perhaps. I don't mean fan fiction, which, by the way, doesn't interest me at all, although a bit of fan editing might be within reason. I think I now prefer just trying to imagine what it was that Tolkien was striving to complete. I enjoy reading and rereading and pondering the unfinished works in the history of Middle-earth and so on. Like that woman in the cartoon who imagined a complete city from one small ruin, with the unfinished writings of Tolkien, we may be able to conceive of Tolkien's world complete within our minds. Nothing survived of Niggle's tree but the painted image of a single leaf. And like Niggle's annoying neighbor, who did not much appreciate his artwork while Niggle was still alive, we can begin by imagination to cultivate our own inner garden in which Tolkien's imaginary world flourishes and comes to completion. But we are blessed to have so much of Tolkien's unfinished work available to us, not just a single leaf like Niggle's. Tolkien's Legendarium has become, for me, something almost interactive, but far more beautiful and exciting, in my opinion, than today's electronic forms of entertainment. As readers of all the many fragmentary and contradictory accounts, we can take pleasure in the sheer open-endedness of Tolkien's work, and we can occupy ourselves almost endlessly trying to imagine how it might have been. Even in the real world, we often do not know what truly happened in the past. Historians try to deduce the actual events from the many mutually contradictory, incomplete accounts preserved in documents of the historical record. We will always be able to engage with the work of Tolkien in this way, precisely because it was, in fact, never finished, and it never will be. We are forever left with many unseen vistas just off the page. But if we hope to complete Tolkien's world in our imaginations, I believe, at least for me, that we should do this with as much respect as possible for the spirit of Tolkien, the author of the work. We should never lose sight of the fact that we are dealing with an invented world which proceeded from the creative mind of a very remarkable individual. The magic key unlocking the secret door of the world of Tolkien is to read and reread as much of the Legendarium as we can, but then not to allow its incompleteness to break the spell. We instead grasp by imagination how the fragmentary quality of the work itself makes it more like real history. It seems to me that the true nature of Tolkien's art is more an art of pure imagination itself than it is an art of completed works of literature. That's not to say he wasn't a very great writer. He was. But he was also a niggler who couldn't stop changing what he made. For me, that's no longer a bug, but a feature. I suppose many people discussing the deep legendarium of Tolkien enjoy precisely what I've been talking about. But at times, fans, self-styled experts, or YouTube content creators offer up their own synthesis of texts as if it were the one true story of what happened. The possible dubiousness of some of the details may get overlooked. I truly hope that nothing all the YouTubers or learned scholars say will become a substitute for reading Tolkien. On this channel, in the future, I hope to present some of my own ideas about debatable points in the Legendarium. But at the same time, I hope that more people will read and try to discern through the tangled maze of texts in the history of Middle-earth what they themselves suppose may have really happened in Tolkien's world. And however much we may try to be faithful to the texts of Tolkien himself, each of us will still imagine it somewhat differently, and that too is a gift. However, I fear that unfaithful and poorly written productions, such as The Rings of Power and the deluge of other films and games about to flood upon us, will end up replacing Tolkien's world in the minds of many. Let's hope not. Lastly, I'd like to mention that beside reading the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, the History of Middle-earth series, and the Nature of Middle-earth, there is another book, Arda Reconstructed, by Douglas Charles King. I cannot say I entirely agree with his vision of how he would reconstruct Arda, which is good, but he does offer some very powerful tools to untangle the texts. Happy reading to you. That's all for today. Next time, I hope to talk about one of the meatiest of unfinished matters. That is, what may have really happened in Nargothrond and Doriath. Bye-bye.